Ladies and gentlemen, Vice President Al Gore.
Thank you again, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. President. It is indeed a great and singular honor for me to be on this campus again, and particularly under these circumstances. And I congratulate you, Dr. Cohen, on your transformative leadership of this institution, not least on matters affecting the environment. I also want to express my personal gratitude to Dr. Ed Rubin, and to say to Ed Rubin and his colleagues at the IPCC how grateful this world is for the 2 decades of work these distinguished scientists at the top of their respective fields have done in a collaborative and impressive and unprecedented way. To Chairman of the Board of Trustees, David Shapira, to the members of the Board of Trustees, and may I mention 3 by name who are close personal friends, Teresa Hines Carey, who invited me to come and dedicate the Hines Center some years ago, as mentioned, but who was by then already a longtime friend and fellow environmental advocate, and a person for whom I have boundless respect. Cynthia Friedman, a very close friend to my wife Tipper and me, and a leader and a founder of a very important program to bring young people into contact with public service. And to my close friend and business partner, Ray Lane, who as a member of your Board of Trustees invited me to come here today. I've enjoyed working with Ray Lane and have learned a great deal from him. To the other distinguished guests who are present, and I don't know if he's present or not, but I wanted to take a moment just to say a special word about one of your professors who has touched the hearts and spirits of our nation, Dr. Randy Pausch, and he is a hero in this country. Ray Lane told the graduating class in Doha about the motto, "Your heart is in the work," and Dr. Randy Pausch's heart is with all of us, and I am very grateful for the opportunity to have read what he's written. I am Al Gore. I used to be the next President of the United States of America. I don't think that's particularly funny. You know, put yourselves in my position for a moment. I flew on Air Force Two for 8 years, and now I have to take off my shoes to get on an airplane. Just one quick story to illustrate the emotional whiplash of that experience. Not long after I left my job in the White House, my wife Tipper and I were driving from our home in Nashville, Tennessee to a small farm we have 50 miles away, and we were driving ourselves. And I know that sounds like a little thing to most of you, but I looked in the rearview mirror and all of a sudden it just hit me. There was no motorcade back there. You've heard of phantom limb pain. This was a rented Ford Taurus, and it was close to dinner time, and so we looked for a place to eat and got off the interstate highway and found a Shoney's restaurant, a low-cost family restaurant chain, and we walked in, sat down at the booth, and the waitress came over and made a big commotion over Tipper, and then took our order and went to the couple in the booth sitting next to us, and she lowered her voice so much I had to really strain to hear what she was saying. She said, "Yes, that's former Vice President Al Gore and his wife Tipper." And the man said, "He's come down a long way, hasn't he?" It was an epiphany. The very next day, continuing a true story, I flew to the continent of Africa, to Nigeria, to give a speech in Lagos on energy policy. And I began my speech by telling that story that had just occurred the day before in Tennessee. And I told it in terms identical to the ones I've used here. Shoney's, low-cost family restaurant chain. Tipper and I were driving ourselves. What the man said, and they laughed. And after giving my speech, I went out to the airport to catch a flight back to the United States. And I fell asleep on the plane until in the middle of the night, we landed on the Azores Islands for refueling. And they opened the door, and I walked out onto the platform to get some fresh air. And to my surprise, a man was waving a piece of paper and running toward the plane across the runway, yelling at the top of his lungs, "Call Washington! Call Washington!" And I thought to myself, how could this be? It's the middle of the night, and we're in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. What in the world could be wrong in Washington? And then I remembered it could be a bunch of things. But what it turned out to be was that one of the wire service reporters in Nigeria had already written a story about my speech there, and it had already been printed in newspapers across America. It was printed here in Pittsburgh, and my staff was very concerned because the story began, former Vice President Al Gore announced in Nigeria yesterday, quote, "My wife Tipper and I have opened a low-cost family restaurant named Shoney's, and we are running it ourselves." Before I could get back to the U.S., the late-night television comics, Jay Leno and David Letterman, who are sometimes not very funny, had already had a field day with this. One of them had me in a big white chef's hat, and Tipper was yelling at me, scribbling furiously, "One more cheeseburger with fries." 3 days later, I got a nice long handwritten letter from my friend and former partner Bill Clinton saying, "Congratulations on the new restaurant, Al." We like to celebrate each other's successes in life. Now I'm a recovering politician on about step 9, and I was thinking of how long it has been since I sat in the seats that these graduates now occupy symbolically. 39 years ago, I remember a beautiful day, my friends, the joy I felt, my family. What a wonderful occasion. There is one thing I have literally, this is true, absolutely no memory of, and that is who it was that gave the commencement address that day. I really have no idea. And I dare say many of you will share that same experience years from now, unless I've successfully tricked you, in any case, into remembering. This is a campus that has provided great leadership for our nation and for our world in confronting what I regard as the most serious crisis our civilization has ever confronted. Sierra Magazine has named Carnegie Mellon as one of the schools that gets it. Researchers here, like Ed Rubin, are leading the world's effort to understand ways that CO2 can be captured and safely stored. Your undergraduate and graduate environmental engineering programs are consistently ranked among the very top in the entire country. Your Environment Across the Curriculum initiative allows all students to integrate an understanding of the environment into their respective courses of study. And you have been walking the walk by becoming the largest retail purchaser of wind power in the United States of America, prompting other colleges and universities in Pennsylvania and around the country to make similar commitments. You have also installed solar array systems, built LEED certified buildings, and have built green roofs and have demonstrated other new technology innovations that have become important as part of the nation's and the world's response. Your recycling program has grown. Your leadership in every field has become extremely important and significant. And it is not an accident that this city that you call home has itself been a Renaissance city, renewing the commitment to leadership in science and technology for which it was known in an earlier era and for which it is known yet again. Pittsburgh has the largest concentration of green buildings and is adding to the many lists of firsts that it is known for. One of the first winners of the Nobel Prize in Chemistry more than 100 years ago, Svante Arrhenius, did calculations with pen and paper, and after 10,000 equations, calculated that if we doubled the amount of CO2 in the Earth's atmosphere, the world's average temperature would go up by several degrees. His calculations were considered speculative for a long time, but the most recent work of the IPCC actually is quite consistent with what Arrhenius predicted more than a century ago. He based his work on accurate infrared observations by Samuel Pierpont Langley, who in turn used an instrument invented in 1890 right here in Pittsburgh, John Alfred Brashear. That story is not well known, but I did a bit of research to find out more about him. And Dr. Brashear was a top flight scientist and inventor. And one of the stories written about him is that he cut a large hole in his roof in Southside Pittsburgh and poked a handmade telescope out the hole in his roof and invited his neighbors to come into his bedroom and explore the heavens on those rare clear nights in those days when the soot-belching steel mills were closed down for the holidays. It prompted me to realize how grateful I am to my own family for their patience with me for all the work I've put into this. And I have told Tipper that whatever other sacrifices I've asked the family to make, I have not yet cut a hole in the roof of the bedroom. A plaque on Brashear's crypt reads, "We have loved the stars too fondly to be fearful of the night." I want to ask all of you to take that thought with you as you leave this graduating ceremony. We have had in the United States of America two special generations in our history that appreciated the promise of the future so much that they overcame all fear to create a new era. The generation of our founders won the struggle for independence, and in its aftermath created the basis for freedom in the modern world. And then, in the middle of the 20th century, the generation we consistently refer to as the greatest generation won the struggle against global fascism in Europe and in the Pacific, both simultaneously. And then, finding upon their return that they had gained moral authority as a result of their struggle and a capacity for long-term vision that they had not taken with them into the battlefield, they set out again to remake the world. African Americans who had been a part of that cause came back and said, "We will no longer put up with segregation." Jackie Robinson, 20 years before he was breaking new ground in professional baseball, was court-martialed in 1945 for refusing to go to the back of the bus. We had Native Americans who helped to win the war struggle and came back and broke new ground. Women who had helped to produce the goods and materiel for victory said, "We are going to insist upon equality." And that generation created the Marshall Plan, lifting their defeated adversaries from the battlefield and helping them march toward renewal, freedom, and prosperity. They created the United Nations and the other institutions that bought us decades of peace and prosperity. You, I hope and expect, will be called upon to be part of the third hero generation in American history. because this moment of your graduation sees the United States of America poised to reclaim its rightful place as the leader of the world as our world confronts this unprecedented challenge. We face a planetary emergency. The concentrations of global warming pollution have been rising at an unprecedented pace and have now given the planet a fever. You know the famous opening sentence of A Tale of Two Cities, these are the best of times, they were the best of times, they were the worst of times. Well, we face now, if I could share with you briefly, a tale of two planets. Earth and Venus are almost exactly the same size and have precisely the same amount of carbon. But the difference is, here on Earth for hundreds of millions of years, through the processes of biology and geology, the CO2 has been pulled out of the atmosphere and sequestered deep in the ground in the form of coal, oil, natural gas, and other fossil fuels. On Venus, those processes were very different and left most of the CO2 in the atmosphere. So as a consequence, the average temperature here is about 59 degrees Fahrenheit worldwide, and on Venus it's 875 degrees Fahrenheit, above the melting point of lead. That story is relevant to our current global strategy of taking as much of that carbon out of the ground as quickly as possible, burning it very inefficiently, and leaving it as poisonous, dangerous residue in the Earth's atmosphere. But because the Industrial Revolution has given us a suite of technologies that have been constructed for 240 years since the first steam engine, we now face an unprecedented challenge in science, engineering, and in public policy. The Industrial Revolution was stimulated in part by England's recognition that trees were disappearing and they could no longer rely on that fuel source. Well, there's a parallel reality today as oil reaches $128 a barrel and the supplies of coal, though abundant in the ground, are now not delivered on time, and the price of all fossil fuels is rising dramatically. We, just as at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, when your counterparts helped to create a new era, we now find that solar energy, particularly in the form of concentrating solar thermal power, and wind energy, and distributed power generation, and geothermal energy, and a series of other new innovations have now reached the stage where we can replace every electron and every BTU from the fossil fuel sources without missing a beat. But we need one ingredient that you represent. We need political will, we need your dedication, we need your hearts. There is an African proverb that says, if you want to go quickly, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. We have to go far, quickly. And we need your help to do it. We have everything we need to get started, with the sole exception of political will. But as you know, here in Pittsburgh and especially at Carnegie Mellon University, political will is a renewable resource. Good luck, Godspeed, congratulations to all of you.